Maria Santos adjusted her worn leather jacket as she stepped off the Greyhound bus at the downtown terminal. The crisp November air cut through the fabric, reminding her that winter was approaching faster than she had anticipated. At 34, Maria carried herself with the disciplined posture that 18 years of military service had drilled into her bones, but her eyes held a weariness that spoke of battles fought both overseas and within her own mind. The bus terminal buzzed with the usual mixture of travelers, homeless individuals seeking shelter, and late-night workers heading home. Maria's trained, I automatically scanned the environment, a habit she couldn't shake even 2 years after her discharge. She was heading to her sister Carmen's apartment across town, but the next bus wouldn't arrive for another 3 hours. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the waiting area filled with plastic chairs and the lingering smell of fast food and disinfectant. Maria found an empty bench near the large windows overlooking the street and settled in for the wait. She pulled out her phone to text Carmen about the delay, then noticed her battery was nearly dead. The charging station nearby was occupied by several people, so she decided to wait. Her duffel bag sat at her feet, containing everything she owned these days, a few changes of clothes, some personal documents, her military medals wrapped carefully in a cloth, and a photo of her unit from her last deployment in Afghanistan. As she sat there, Maria's mind wandered to the events that had led her to this moment. After serving 3 tours of duty overseas, she had returned home to find civilian life more challenging than any battlefield she had encountered. The nightmares came first, then the anxiety attacks in crowded spaces. The Department of Veterans Affairs had tried to help, but the system was overwhelmed and understaffed. Her marriage to David had crumbled under the weight of her struggles with post-traumatic stress, and when the divorce was finalized 6 months ago, she had lost not just her husband, but also the house they had bought together. For the past few months, Maria had been staying in a transitional housing program for veterans, but her time there was coming to an end. Carmen had offered her a place to stay while she got back on her feet, though Maria knew her younger sister was struggling financially as a single mother working 2 jobs. The guilt of being a burden weighed heavily on Maria's shoulders, adding to the invisible load she already carried. Lost in thought, Maria almost didn't notice the young woman who had been sitting across from her for the past hour. The girl couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, with shoulder-length brown hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in several days. She wore faded jeans with holes in the knees, a thin sweater that had seen better days, and sneakers that were worn down to almost nothing. Next to her sat 2 large duffel bags and a backpack, all of which looked heavy and well-traveled. What caught Maria's attention was how the young woman kept nodding off, only to jerk awake every few minutes as if afraid someone might take her belongings. Each time she woke, her hand would instinctively move to check that her bags were still there, and her eyes would dart around the terminal nervously. Maria recognized the signs. This girl was homeless, probably had been for a while, and was using the bus station as a temporary shelter. Maria watched discreetly as the young woman pulled out a small wallet and counted what appeared to be very few bills. The girl's shoulders sagged with disappointment, and she tucked the wallet back into her jacket pocket. She then reached into one of her bags and pulled out what looked like a partially eaten sandwich wrapped in a napkin. She ate it slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be her last meal for a while. The sight stirred something deep in Maria's chest. During her time in the military, she had witnessed poverty and desperation in many forms, but there was something about seeing it here in her own country in this sterile bus terminal that hit her differently. This girl was probably someone's daughter, maybe someone's sister. She could have been Maria's own younger self, if circumstances had been different. Maria's military training had taught her to assess situations quickly and act decisively when needed. She could see that this young woman was in trouble, and every instinct told her to help. But Maria also knew that approaching strangers, especially vulnerable ones, required care and sensitivity. She didn't want to embarrass the girl or make her feel like a charity case. As if sensing she was being watched, the young woman looked up and made eye contact with Maria. Instead of looking away embarrassedly, Maria offered a small, genuine smile. The girl seemed surprised by the friendly gesture and gave a tentative smile back before looking down at her hands. Maria made her decision. She stood up, left her bag on the bench to mark her spot, and walked over to the vending machines near the wall. She purchased 2 cups of hot coffee and a couple of sandwiches, then approached the young woman's seating area. "Excuse me," Maria said gently, keeping her voice soft and non-threatening. "I noticed you've been waiting here for a while, just like me. I bought some extra coffee and thought you might like some. It's pretty cold in here." The young woman looked up with surprise and suspicion warring in her dark brown eyes. "I don't have any money," she said quietly, her voice carrying a slight accent that Maria couldn't immediately place. "I'm not asking for money," Maria replied with a smile, sitting down carefully on the chair next to her, making sure not to crowd her space. "I'm Maria, and I'm waiting for the next bus just like you are. Sometimes waiting is easier with company and something warm to drink." The girl studied Maria's face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of trick or scam. Finally, she reached out and accepted the coffee cup with both hands, wrapping her fingers around it for warmth. "Thank you," she said softly. Elena. "It's nice to meet you, Elena," Maria said, settling back in her chair with her own coffee. "Are you traveling far?" Elena took a careful sip of the coffee and seemed to relax slightly. "I'm not really sure yet," she admitted. "I'm trying to figure out where to go next." Maria nodded, understanding more than Elena probably realized. "Sometimes the journey is more important than the destination," she said. "I've found that the right path usually reveals itself when you need it most." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both women warming their hands on their coffee cups and watching the ebb and flow of people through the terminal. Maria noticed that Elena kept glancing at her bags nervously, and she realized the girl was probably wondering if this was some elaborate setup to rob her or worse. "You know," Maria said conversationally, "I spent a lot of years traveling from place to place. It teaches you to be careful about who you trust, but it also teaches you to recognize when someone genuinely wants to help." Elena turned to look at her more closely. "What kind of traveling?" she asked. "Military," Maria replied simply. "I was in the Army for 18 years. Deployed overseas several times. Got pretty good at reading people and situations." This seemed to put Elena more at ease. There was something about Maria's straightforward manner and calm confidence that felt safe to her. "Were you in combat?" Elena asked quietly. "Yeah, I was," Maria said, looking out the window at the city lights. "Afghanistan, mostly." "It was complicated." Elena nodded, as if she understood complicated situations. "My brother wanted to join the military," she said. "But our parents wouldn't let him. They said it was too dangerous." "Smart parents," Maria replied. "Though sometimes life finds ways to be dangerous no matter what choices we make." There was something in the way Elena said it that made Maria suspect there was more to her story. The girl had the look of someone who had experienced hardship beyond her years, and Maria's protective instincts were increasingly engaged. "Have you eaten anything today besides that sandwich?" Maria asked gently. Elena's cheeks flushed slightly. "I'm okay," she said, but her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. Maria smiled and held out one of the sandwiches she had purchased. "I bought 2 because I wasn't sure what I was hungry for. Would you mind helping me out and taking one?" Elena hesitated, clearly torn between pride and hunger. Hunger won. She accepted the sandwich with a quiet "thank you" and unwrapped it carefully. As she ate, Maria noticed how thin she was beneath her loose clothing and how her hands shook slightly, though whether from hunger, cold, or something else, Maria couldn't tell. "Elena," Maria said carefully, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena stopped chewing and looked down at her sandwich. When she looked back up at Maria, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I've been staying here for the past 3 nights," Elena admitted quietly. "Security doesn't bother you as much if you have bus tickets and luggage. I bought a ticket to Portland, but I don't actually want to go there. I just needed something to show them. Maria felt her heart clench. This girl was barely older than some of the soldiers she had commanded overseas, and here she was alone and homeless in a bus station. Elena, can I ask how you ended up here? You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Elena was quiet for so long that Maria thought she wasn't going to respond. Finally, she spoke in a voice so soft that Maria had to lean forward to hear her. I aged out of foster care 6 months ago, Elena said. I was supposed to have a transition plan, but my caseworker got transferred and the new one things fell through the cracks. I had a job at a grocery store, but I couldn't afford rent on what they were paying me. I stayed with friends for a while, but that couldn't last forever. I've been trying to figure out what to do, where to go. Maria felt a familiar surge of anger at systems that failed the people they were supposed to protect. She had experienced it herself with the VA, and now she was seeing it again with this young woman who had been failed by child services. What about your parents? Maria asked gently. Elena shook her head. They died in a car accident when I was 12. I didn't have any other family, so I went into the system. I had some good placements and some not-so-good ones. My last foster family was okay, but they made it clear that I was on my own when I turned 18. Maria felt a deep well of empathy and recognition. While their circumstances were different, she understood what it felt like to be cast adrift without a support system, to feel like you were navigating life's challenges entirely alone. That's a lot to handle, Maria said. You've been incredibly strong to make it this far on your own. Elena looked surprised by the compliment. I don't feel strong, she said. I feel scared most of the time. I don't know what I'm doing or where I'm going. Strength isn't about not being scared, Maria said, drawing on lessons she had learned both in the military and in her own struggles with civilian life. Strength is about keeping going even when you're scared, and you've been doing that. They continued talking as the evening progressed. Maria learned that Elena had graduated high school with good grades and had been planning to attend community college before her support system collapsed. She was intelligent and articulate, with dreams of studying social work, so she could help other kids in foster care navigate the system better than she had. Elena, in turn, learned about Maria's struggles with returning to civilian life, her divorce, and her upcoming stay with her sister. Maria was careful not to make the conversation about her own problems, but she wanted Elena to understand that everyone faced challenges, even adults who seemed to have their lives together. As midnight approached, the bus terminal began to empty out. The cleaning crew arrived, and Maria noticed the security guard making more frequent rounds. Elena seemed to sense the change in atmosphere and began gathering her belongings nervously. They'll probably ask me to leave soon, Elena said quietly. They've been pretty tolerant, but they can't let people sleep here indefinitely. Maria looked around the terminal, then back at Elena. An idea was forming in her mind, but she wanted to think it through carefully before acting on it. She had been planning to surprise Carmen by showing up early, but her sister wouldn't mind if she arrived in the morning instead of in the middle of the night. Elena, Maria said slowly, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer. I'm going to get a hotel room for the night instead of waiting here until dawn. Would you like to come with me? Separate beds, of course, and you can leave whenever you want. I just thought it might be safer and more comfortable than spending another night here. Elena stared at her with wide eyes. I can't pay for a hotel room, she said. I'm not asking you to pay, Maria replied. I'm asking if you'd like to get a good night's sleep in a safe place. Sometimes people help each other just because it's the right thing to do. Elena was quiet for a long moment, and Maria could almost see the internal debate playing out on her face. Trust versus suspicion, hope versus fear, desperation versus pride. Why would you do that for a stranger? Elena asked finally. Maria considered the question seriously. Because once, when I was in a really dark place, a stranger helped me when they didn't have to. They probably saved my life, though they might not have realized it. Maybe this is how I pay that forward. Elena looked down at her hands, then back up at Maria. Okay, she said quietly. If you're sure it's no trouble. No trouble at all, Maria said, standing and shouldering her duffel bag. Let me help you with your bags. As they gathered Elena's belongings and Headed toward the exit, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was more significant than either of them realized. She had approached Elena with the simple intention of offering help to someone in need, but something about the young woman's resilience and quiet dignity reminded Maria of her own younger self. Neither of them could have imagined that this moment of compassion in a bus terminal would be the beginning of a connection that would change both of their lives in ways they never could have expected. Sometimes fate works through the smallest gestures of human kindness, and sometimes those gestures create ripples that extend far beyond what anyone could anticipate. The automatic doors of the bus station slid open, and Maria and Elena stepped out into the cool night air, two women from different generations and different circumstances, united by the simple human need for connection and hope. Behind them, the fluorescent lights of the terminal continued to hum, waiting for the next group of travelers to pass through, but neither Maria nor Elena looked back. As they walked down the street toward the nearest hotel, Maria found herself thinking about the phone call she would make to Carmen in the morning, explaining why she had decided to help a young stranger. She knew her sister would understand. Carmen had always had a soft spot for people in need, and she had been the one to encourage Maria to reach out when she was struggling. Elena, meanwhile, was experiencing a mixture of relief and nervousness that she hadn't felt in months. For the first time since aging out of foster care, someone was offering her help without expecting anything in return. It felt almost too good to be true, and part of her remained cautiously alert for signs that this kindness came with strings attached. But as they walked together through the quiet city streets, both women began to sense that this unexpected meeting might be exactly what each of them needed, even if they didn't fully understand why yet. Hashtag the veteran story. Part 2. The morning sun filtered through the hotel room curtains, casting gentle shadows across the modest space. Maria woke naturally at 6 a.m., her internal military clock still functioning perfectly after all these years. She lay quietly for a moment, listening to the soft, steady breathing from the other bed. Elena was still asleep, curled up under the covers with one hand clutching the edge of the blanket. It was the first peaceful sleep the young woman had experienced in weeks, and Maria was careful not to wake her. Maria slipped quietly into the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, studying her reflection in the mirror. Her dark hair was showing more gray than she liked to admit, and the lines around her eyes had deepened over the past few years of stress and uncertainty. But there was something different this morning, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. Helping Elena yesterday had awakened something in her that had been dormant since her discharge from the military. When she emerged from the bathroom, Elena was sitting up in bed, looking around with the momentary confusion of someone waking up in an unfamiliar place. Recognition dawned quickly, followed by what looked like relief. "Good morning," Maria said softly. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Elena admitted, running her fingers through her tangled hair. "I forgot what it felt like to not worry about someone stealing my stuff while I slept." "That's a terrible way to have to live," Maria said, settling into the chair by the window. "No one should have to sleep with one eye open because they don't have a safe place to rest." Elena nodded, then looked down at her hands. "I should probably get going. I don't want to take up more of your time than I already have." "Elena," Maria said gently, "can I ask you something? What's your plan for today?" The question hung in the air. Elena was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I guess I'll go back to the bus station. Try to figure out my next move. Maybe I'll actually use that ticket to Portland eventually." Maria had been thinking about Elena's situation since she woke up, and an idea had been forming in her mind. It was impulsive and would require her to make some significant changes to her own plans, but something told her it was the right thing to do. "What if I told you there might be another option?" Maria said carefully. "My sister Carmen lives here in town. She's a single mother working 2 jobs, but she has a big heart and always finds room to help people who need it. I was going to stay with her while I got back on my feet after some recent changes in my life." Elena looked puzzled. "I don't understand." "I'm thinking," Maria continued, "that maybe we could both benefit from having someone to share the burden with. Carmen has a 3-bedroom apartment, and She's been struggling to make ends meet. If we both stayed there temporarily, we could help with rent and groceries, help with her kids, and give each other support while we figure out our next steps. Elena's eyes widened. You would do that? But you barely know me. Maria smiled. Elena, I've spent 18 years learning to read people quickly and accurately. In one evening, I've seen more strength, intelligence, and resilience in you than I've seen in many people I've known for years. Yes, it's a risk, but sometimes the best things in life come from taking the right risks. Elena was quiet for several minutes, processing what Maria had suggested. What about your sister? Wouldn't she mind having a complete stranger move in? Let me call her and find out, Maria said, pulling out her phone. But I think I know Carmen well enough to predict her response. Maria dialed her sister's number, and Carmen answered on the second ring despite the early hour. Maria, please tell me you're not calling from jail or a hospital, Carmen said by way of greeting, her voice warm with affection and a hint of worry. Nothing like that, Maria laughed. But I do have something unexpected to discuss with you. Are the kids awake yet? They're still sleeping, thank God. It's Saturday, so I actually get to rest for a few minutes before the chaos begins. What's going on? Maria took a deep breath and explained the events of the previous evening, carefully outlining Elena's situation and her own idea about them both staying with Carmen temporarily. She watched Elena's face as she spoke, seeing hope and nervousness warring in the young woman's expression. Carmen listened without interruption until Maria finished. Then, there was a moment of silence before Carmen responded. Bring her over, Carmen said simply. We'll figure out the details when you get here. Anyone you trust enough to help is someone I want to meet. Are you sure? Maria asked. I know money is tight for you right now. Money's always tight, Carmen replied with a laugh. But having 2 extra people to help with groceries, utilities, and watching the kids while I work, that sounds like exactly what I need. Besides, you know me well enough to know I can't turn away someone who needs help. Maria felt a surge of gratitude for her sister's generous heart. We'll take a cab over in about an hour, if that works. Perfect. I'll make a big breakfast, and we can all get to know each other properly. After hanging up, Maria turned to Elena, who had been listening with wide eyes. She said yes. Maria reported unnecessarily, since Elena had clearly heard the entire conversation. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I don't understand why you're both being so kind to me. People don't usually what? Maria asked gently. Help, Elena finished quietly. In my experience, most people look the other way when someone needs help, or they help only if they get something out of it. Maria sat down on the edge of Elena's bed. Elena, can I tell you something about helping people? Sometimes we help others because we recognize something of ourselves in them. Sometimes we help because we remember what it felt like to need help and not get it. And sometimes we help simply because it's the right thing to do, and doing the right thing makes us better people. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What if I mess this up? What if I'm not good enough to deserve this kind of help? Listen to me, Maria said firmly. Worth isn't something you have to earn. You deserve safety, shelter, food, and the opportunity to build a life for yourself simply because you exist. The fact that other people have failed you doesn't mean you're not worthy of help. Elena nodded slowly, as if trying to internalize what Maria was saying. Okay, she said finally. I'd like to meet your sister, and I promise I'll do everything I can to help and not be a burden. You won't be a burden, Maria assured her. We'll all be helping each other. An hour later, they stood outside Carmen's apartment building, a modest 3-story structure in a working-class neighborhood. Elena carried her bags nervously, and Maria could sense her anxiety. Remember, Maria said as they climbed the stairs to the second floor, Carmen already wants to help. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Carmen opened the door before they could knock, having heard their footsteps on the stairs. She was a shorter, rounder version of Maria, with the same warm brown eyes and quick smile. She wore jeans and a sweater that had seen better days, but her face lit up when she saw them. You must be Elena, Carmen said, immediately stepping forward to give the young woman a gentle hug. I'm Carmen, and I'm so glad Maria found you. Elena looked surprised by the immediate warmth, but returned the hug tentatively. Thank you for letting me come here. I promise I won't be any trouble. Honey, Carmen said, ushering them both inside. Anyone who's important to Maria is important to me. Come in, come in. Breakfast is almost ready. The apartment was small, but clean and comfortable, with mismatched furniture and children's artwork covering the refrigerator. The smell of coffee, eggs, and bacon filled the air, and Elena's stomach growled audibly. That's the sound of someone who needs a good meal, Carmen observed. Sit down at the table, and I'll get you both some coffee. As they settled around the small dining table, two children emerged from the back of the apartment. A boy who looked about 10 and a girl who appeared to be 7 or 8, both with Carmen's dark hair and curious eyes. This is Miguel and Sophia, Carmen said, bringing over plates of food. Kids, this is your Aunt Maria, who you haven't seen in way too long. And this is Elena, who's going to be staying with us for a while. Miguel studied Elena with the frank curiosity of a child. Are you homeless? He asked directly. Miguel, Carmen said sharply, but Elena held up a hand. It's okay, she said to Carmen, then turned to Miguel. I was homeless, yes, but your mom and Aunt are helping me find a safe place to stay while I figure out what to do next. Sophia, who had been hiding behind Carmen, stepped forward shyly. Were you scared? She asked. Yes, Elena answered honestly. I was scared a lot, but your aunt helped me feel safer. Carmen smiled approvingly at Elena's straightforward responses to her children's questions. All right, you two sit down and eat. Elena and Maria need some food too. As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally. Carmen asked Elena about her background and interests, and Elena found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She told them about her dreams of studying social work, her love of reading, and her experience working in retail. You know, Carmen said thoughtfully, my friend Rosa manages a small bookstore downtown. They've been looking for someone part-time. It doesn't pay a lot, but it might be a good place to start while you figure out your longer-term plans. Elena's eyes lit up. I love books. I used to spend hours in the library when I was younger. I'll give Rosa a call on Monday, Carmen promised. She's good people, and she believes in giving folks a second chance. Maria watched the interaction between Elena and Carmen with growing satisfaction. She had been right about her sister's generous nature, and it was clear that Elena was already beginning to fit into the family dynamic. After breakfast, Carmen showed Elena around the apartment. The third bedroom was small, but had a window with good natural light and enough space for a bed and dresser. It's not fancy, Carmen said apologetically, but it's private and it's yours for as long as you need it. Elena stood in the doorway, looking around the small space with wonder. I haven't had my own room since I was in foster care, she said quietly. This is perfect. Over the next few hours, they worked together to get Elena settled. Maria and Carmen helped her unpack her belongings, and Carmen found some extra sheets and towels. The children, initially shy around Elena, quickly warmed up to her, especially when they discovered she was willing to help with a puzzle they had been struggling to complete. As the day progressed, Maria found herself observing Elena carefully. The young woman seemed to be blossoming in the warm, stable environment of Carmen's home. She was helpful without being intrusive, good with the children without trying to take over, and grateful without being servile. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, the three women sat around the kitchen table with cups of tea, discussing practical matters. We'll need to get you a bus pass for job interviews, Carmen said to Elena. And maybe some more clothes if you don't have any. I have a little money saved, Elena said. Not much, but enough to cover some basics. We'll pool our resources, Maria said firmly. That's what families do, and for now we're family. Elena looked up from her teacup with surprise. Family, chosen family, Carmen clarified with a smile. Sometimes the people who matter most aren't the ones you're born to, but the ones who choose to stand by you when things get tough. Elena's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. I've never had a chosen family before. Well, you do now, Maria said. "And we take care of each other." As the conversation continued, they began making concrete plans. Elena would interview at the bookstore, and if that didn't work out, they would help her find other opportunities. Carmen would show her the public transportation system and introduce her to other people in the neighborhood. Maria would help her apply for community college programs and look into financial aid options. "What about you, Maria?" Carmen asked. "What are your plans now that you're here?" Maria had been thinking about this question all day. "I've been considering going back to school myself," she said slowly. "Maybe studying counseling or social work. I think I'd like to work with other veterans who are struggling with the transition to civilian life." "That's a wonderful idea," Elena said enthusiastically. "You'd be so good at that. You have such a way of making people feel understood and supported." Carmen nodded in agreement. "You've always been good at taking care of people, Maria. Even when we were kids, you were the one other children came to when they needed help or advice." As the evening wound down and they prepared for bed, Maria reflected on how much had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, she had been a woman struggling with her own demons, uncertain about her future, and feeling like a burden on her family. Tonight, she was part of a small but strong support system with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Elena, meanwhile, was experiencing something she had only dreamed about during her years in foster care and her months of homelessness. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she was valued not for what she could provide, but simply for who she was. Carmen lay in her own bed that night thinking about how natural it felt to have Maria and Elena in her home. She had been struggling to balance work and parenting alone, and having two additional adults to share responsibilities with already felt like a blessing. None of them could have predicted that this arrangement, born out of a chance encounter and mutual need, would evolve into something much deeper and more permanent than any of them had imagined. They were three women from different backgrounds and different generations, brought together by circumstances that could have broken them, but instead were forging bonds that would sustain them through challenges yet to come. Over the following weeks, their routine developed naturally. Elena got the job at the bookstore and threw herself into the work with enthusiasm. She had a natural talent for recommending books to customers and helping them find exactly what they were looking for. Rosa, the store manager, was impressed with Elena's dedication and her intuitive understanding of what made different books appealing to different readers. Maria began volunteering at a local veterans center, providing peer counseling and support to other former service members. She discovered that her own struggles with PTSD and the transition to civilian life made her uniquely qualified to help others facing similar challenges. The work was emotionally demanding, but deeply fulfilling. Carmen found that having help with the children and household expenses allowed her to reduce her hours at her second job, giving her more time to spend with Miguel and Sophia. The children, initially curious about their new housemates, quickly came to think of Elena and Maria as permanent members of their family. The three women developed a system of shared responsibilities that played to each of their strengths. Elena, with her love of organization and detail, managed the household budget and meal planning. Maria, with her military discipline and protective instincts, handled home security and maintenance issues. Carmen, with her warm heart and natural parenting skills, continued to serve as the emotional center of their little family. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of tension and adjustment as they learned to live together. Elena sometimes withdrew into herself when overwhelmed by the kindness she was receiving, unsure how to accept care without suspicion. Maria occasionally had bad days when her PTSD symptoms flared up, making her irritable and withdrawn. Carmen sometimes felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of taking care of everyone, even though she had willingly chosen to do so. During these difficult moments, they learned to communicate openly and support each other through temporary setbacks. Elena learned to voice her needs and concerns instead of suffering in silence. Maria learned to accept help and comfort from others instead of trying to handle everything alone. Carmen learned to ask for help when she needed it instead of trying to be strong for everyone all the time. The turning point came about 6 weeks after Elena had first moved in. She had been working at the bookstore consistently and had saved enough money to contribute significantly to the household expenses. Maria had completed her volunteer training and was considering applying to a counseling program at the local community college. Carmen had finally been able to quit her second job and focus more attention on her children and her main career as a medical technician. It was a Thursday evening, and they were all gathered around the kitchen table helping Miguel and Sophia with their homework when Elena made an announcement that would change everything. Hashtag the veteran story, part 3. I need to tell you all something, Elena said quietly, setting down the pencil she had been using to help Sophia with her math problems. Her voice carried a nervous tremor that immediately caught everyone's attention. Maria looked up from Miguel's geography homework, and Carmen paused in the middle of preparing lunches for the next day. The children, sensing the shift in atmosphere, stopped their chatter and looked between the adults with curious eyes. "What is it, honey?" Carmen asked gently, moving to sit down at the table with them. Elena took a deep breath, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Rosa offered me a promotion at the bookstore. She wants me to become the assistant manager, which means more money and more responsibility. But there's something else." She paused, looking around the table at the faces that had become so dear to her over the past 6 weeks. "There's also an opportunity for me to apply for a scholarship program through the state university. It's specifically for former foster youth who want to study social work. If I get it, it would cover tuition, books, and provide a small living stipend." Maria felt a surge of pride and excitement. "Elena, that's wonderful. You've worked so hard for this. But here's the thing," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. "The scholarship program requires me to maintain a certain GPA and complete specific internship hours. It's a 4-year commitment, and it's demanding. I would need to know that I have a stable place to live and a support system I can count on." Carmen reached across the table and took Elena's hand. "You have that here. This is your home for as long as you need it." "That's just it," Elena said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't want this to be temporary anymore. Over these past weeks, you've all become my real family. I want to ask if we can make this official somehow. Not just me staying here until I get on my feet, but all of us building something permanent together." The silence that followed was filled with emotion rather than uncertainty. Maria felt something settle into place inside her chest, a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since before her deployment overseas. Carmen felt tears spring to her eyes as she realized that Elena was offering exactly what she had been hoping for but hadn't dared to ask. "I'd like that," Maria said quietly. "I'd like that very much." "Me too," Carmen whispered. "This house has never felt more like a home than it has these past few weeks." Miguel, who had been listening with the intensity that children bring to important adult conversations, spoke up. "Does this mean Elena is going to be our sister now?" Elena laughed through her tears. "If that's okay with you." "It's okay with me," Sophia said solemnly. "You make good pancakes, and you read stories with different voices." The emotional intensity of the moment was broken by laughter, and they spent the rest of the evening talking about what their new arrangement would look like practically. They discussed finances, household responsibilities, and how to support Elena through her college program while Maria pursued her own educational goals. Over the following months, their unconventional family unit solidified into something stronger than any of them had experienced before. Elena began her college courses with determination and enthusiasm, balancing her studies with her work at the bookstore and her responsibilities at home. Her professors were impressed with her maturity and insight, particularly in classes dealing with family systems and child welfare. Maria enrolled in a counseling program at the community college, focusing on trauma therapy and veteran services. Her own experiences with PTSD gave her a unique perspective that her instructors and fellow students valued. She continued her volunteer work at the Veterans Center, and word began to spread about her natural ability to connect with struggling veterans. Carmen thrived in her role as the anchor of their family. With Elena and Maria sharing household and childcare responsibilities, she was able to pursue additional training in her field and eventually earned a promotion that significantly improved their financial situation. More importantly, she watched her children blossom under the influence of two additional adult role models who cared about their well-being. The children, for their part, adapted to their expanded family with the resilience that children often demonstrate. Miguel began to excel in school, inspired by watching the adults around him pursue their educational goals. Sophia, always the more sensitive of the two children, found in Elena a patient listener who understood what it felt like to sometimes feel different or left out. But it was the unexpected challenges they faced together that truly tested and strengthened their bonds. The first major test came about 8 months after Elena had moved in, when Maria experienced a severe episode of PTSD triggered by a car backfiring near the Veterans Center. Carmen got the call at work. Elena had found Maria in the parking lot, reliving a traumatic incident from her deployment in Afghanistan. She was unresponsive and hyperventilating, lost in a flashback that had transported her back to a roadside bombing that had killed 3 of her fellow soldiers. Elena had stayed with Maria, talking to her calmly and consistently until the episode passed, then brought her home and called Carmen for guidance. By the time Carmen arrived, Maria was coherent, but exhausted and deeply embarrassed by what had happened. "I'm sorry," Maria kept repeating. "I thought I was getting better. I didn't want you guys to see me like this." "Maria," Elena said firmly, sitting beside her on the couch, "you took me in when I was sleeping in a bus station. You didn't judge me for being homeless or assume I was weak because I needed help. Do you really think we're going to judge you for having PTSD?" Carmen nodded in agreement. "We're family. That means we take care of each other through the good times and the difficult ones. No exceptions." That evening, they had their first real conversation about Maria's struggles with PTSD. She explained how the symptoms could be unpredictable, how certain sounds or situations could trigger flashbacks, and how she sometimes felt like she was losing her mind despite knowing intellectually that she was safe. Elena listened with the attention of someone who understood trauma from a different but equally real perspective. "In foster care," she said quietly, "I learned that sometimes our minds and bodies hold on to scary experiences even when we don't want them to. It doesn't mean you're broken or weak. It means you survived something terrible." From that day forward, they developed strategies for supporting Maria through difficult episodes. Elena researched PTSD symptoms and treatment options. Carmen rearranged her work schedule to be more flexible when Maria needed support, and the children were gently educated about why Aunt Maria sometimes needed quiet time or space. The second major challenge came from an unexpected direction. About a year after Elena had started college, her former caseworker contacted her with surprising news. Elena's maternal grandmother, whom everyone had believed was dead, was actually alive and living in a nursing home in another state. She had been trying to locate Elena for years after learning about her granddaughter's situation. Elena was torn between excitement and anxiety about this development. She had longed for blood family her entire life, but she had also finally found a chosen family that gave her the security and love she had always craved. "What if she wants me to come live near her?" Elena asked during one of their family meetings. "What if she thinks what we have here isn't real family?" "Elena," Carmen said gently, "what we have here is absolutely real family. Nothing and no one could change that. But that doesn't mean you can't also explore a relationship with your grandmother, if that's what you want." Maria nodded in agreement. "Family isn't a zero-sum game. Having more people who love you doesn't diminish the love we share here." After much discussion, they decided that Elena would travel to meet her grandmother, accompanied by Maria for moral support. The visit was emotionally intense, but ultimately positive. Elena's grandmother, a woman in her 80s named Rosa Delgado, was overjoyed to meet her granddaughter and heartbroken to learn about the struggles Elena had faced alone. But Mrs. Delgado was also wise enough to recognize the strength of the bonds Elena had formed with Maria and Carmen's family. "Mija," she told Elena during their visit, I spent years regretting that I couldn't find you and take care of you. But seeing the strong, educated, loving young woman you become, I think maybe God put you exactly where you needed to be." Elena returned home with a new connection to her biological family, but also with absolute certainty about where she belonged. Mrs. Delgado became an extended member of their chosen family, regularly calling and visiting when her health permitted. The third and most significant challenge came during Elena's junior year of college, when Carmen was diagnosed with breast cancer. The diagnosis came after a routine mammogram showed suspicious spots that required immediate follow-up. The biopsy confirmed their worst fears. Carmen tried to downplay the seriousness of the situation, insisting she could handle the treatment on her own and that Elena and Maria shouldn't disrupt their lives to take care of her. But Elena and Maria had learned too much about the importance of family support to accept this. "Carmen," Elena said during the family meeting where Carmen broke the news, "2 years ago, you opened your home to a homeless stranger because you believe in taking care of people who need help. Do you really think we're going to let you face cancer alone?" Maria was equally determined. "We're going to get through this together, just like we've gotten through everything else." The next several months tested their family in ways none of them had anticipated. Carmen's treatment was aggressive and debilitating, requiring chemotherapy and radiation that left her exhausted and sick much of the time. Elena and Maria stepped up to handle increased household responsibilities, childcare duties, and emotional support for everyone in the family. Elena temporarily reduced her course load to part-time, so she could be available to drive Carmen to appointments and care for the children when Carmen was too sick to function normally. Maria used her crisis management skills from the military to coordinate medical care, insurance issues, and the complex logistics of maintaining a household when a primary caregiver was unable to function at full capacity. The children, initially frightened by their mother's diagnosis and treatment, found comfort in the stability that Elena and Maria provided. Miguel, now 12 and old enough to understand the seriousness of the situation, became fiercely protective of his mother and proud of the way their extended family rallied around her. Sophia, still young enough to live primarily in the present, accepted the changes to their routine with the adaptability of childhood. During the worst days of Carmen's treatment, when she was too weak to get out of bed and too sick to eat, Elena would sit with her for hours, reading aloud or simply providing silent companionship. Maria would take over bedtime routines with the children, using her calm presence and practical problem-solving skills to maintain a sense of normalcy and security. "I don't know how to repay you for this," Carmen whispered to Elena during one of her worst days, when Elena had spent the entire day caring for her and managing the household. "Carmen," Elena replied softly, "you gave me a family when I had nothing. You gave me a home when I was sleeping in a bus station. Taking care of you isn't something I have to be repaid for. It's something I get to do because I love you." The months of treatment were followed by months of recovery and uncertainty. Carmen's cancer responded well to treatment, but the experience had changed all of them. They had learned that the bonds they had built were strong enough to withstand serious crisis, and that their commitment to each other went beyond convenience or mutual benefit. Carmen's recovery was slow, but steady. Her hair grew back curlier than before, and she joked that cancer had given her the curls she had always wanted. More significantly, the experience had given her a deeper appreciation for the family they had built together and a determination to make the most of the time they had. Elena graduated from college summa cum laude, with job offers from several social service agencies. She chose to work for a nonprofit organization that provided services to foster youth aging out of the system, bringing her experience full circle. At her graduation ceremony, Carmen, Maria, Miguel, Sophia, and even Mrs. Delgado were all in attendance, cheering loudly when Elena's name was called. Maria completed her counseling program and was hired by the Department of Veterans Affairs to provide therapy services to combat veterans struggling with PTSD and other service-related mental health issues. Her unique combination of personal experience and professional training made her exceptionally effective in her new role. But perhaps the most significant change was one that none of them had seen coming. During Carmen's cancer treatment, a social worker at the hospital had been impressed by the strength and functionality of their unconventional family structure. When a teenage boy named David entered the foster care system with complex trauma and behavioral issues that had made him difficult to place, the social worker approached them about providing respite care. David was 15, angry, and distrustful of all adults. He had been in and out of multiple placements and was considered a challenging case by the child welfare system. Most families were intimidated by his history of running away and acting out, but Elena saw in him something of her own younger self, and Maria recognized the defensive anger of someone who had experienced trauma. "We've never fostered before," Carmen said when the social worker first approached them. "Are we even qualified?" "You're a stable family with experience supporting each other through crisis," the social worker replied. "You have adults with training in both social work and trauma counseling, and you've demonstrated a remarkable ability to help people who have been failed by traditional systems. I think you might be exactly what David needs." After extensive discussion and preparation, they agreed to provide temporary respite care for David while a more permanent placement was found. They converted their basement into a bedroom and prepared themselves for the challenges of caring for a traumatized teenager. David arrived on a Thursday evening in late spring, carrying a trash bag full of his belongings and an attitude of defiant hostility. He made it clear that he didn't want to be there, didn't trust any of them, and was planning to run away at the first opportunity. Elena, remembering her own experience of being passed from place to place, was patient with his anger. Maria, understanding the defensive mechanisms of trauma, gave him space while making it clear that he was safe. Carmen, with her natural maternal instincts, provided consistent care and boundaries without trying to force emotional connection. The first few weeks were difficult. David tested every rule, challenged every kindness, and actively looked for evidence that this family would give up on him like all the others had. But gradually, the stability and consistency of their household began to have an effect. Miguel and Sophia, initially wary of the angry teenager in their basement, slowly began to warm up to him when they discovered he was actually very good at video games and had a secret talent for making them laugh. Elena found opportunities to share her own experiences with foster care, not in a preachy way, but simply by letting David know that someone else understood what it felt like to be on the outside looking in. Maria discovered that David had a keen intelligence hidden beneath his anger, and she began working with him on academic goals that could help him succeed despite his disrupted education. Carmen simply continued to treat him as a member of the family, expecting him to contribute to household chores and participate in family activities without making a big deal about it. The breakthrough came about 2 months into David's stay, when Carmen had a minor health scare related to her cancer recovery. David, who had been maintaining his stance of not caring about anyone in the family, was visibly shaken by the possibility that something might happen to Carmen. "She's going to be okay," Elena assured him as they sat in the hospital waiting room while Carmen underwent additional tests. "The doctors just want to be sure." "It doesn't matter to me either way," David said, but his voice cracked slightly as he said it. "It's okay to care about her," Maria said quietly. "Caring about people doesn't make you weak." When Carmen came home with a clean bill of health, David was waiting with a roughly made card that said, "Get well soon," in his careful handwriting. It was the first open expression of affection he had shown since arriving. From that point forward, David began to tentatively allow himself to become part of their family. He still had difficult days and setbacks, but the overall trajectory was positive. When it came time to discuss his permanent placement, the question arose naturally. Would they be interested in adopting him? The family meeting to discuss this possibility was one of the most emotionally charged they had ever had. David, now 16 and more mature than when he had arrived, was honest about both his gratitude and his fears. "I want to stay," he said quietly. "This is the first place that's ever felt like home. But I'm scared that if you adopt me, I'll mess it up somehow and you'll regret it." Elena, now 23 and working successfully in her chosen field, spoke with the wisdom of someone who had traveled a similar path. David, every single person in this family has been afraid of messing up and losing the love we've found here. That fear doesn't go away completely, but it gets easier when you realize that real families don't give up on each other. The adoption process took several months, but eventually David officially became David Santos Rodriguez, taking both Carmen's maiden name and the surname they had all chosen to share. The courthouse ceremony was small, but deeply meaningful, with their entire chosen family present to witness David's official entry into their unconventional but deeply loving family unit. By the time Elena turned 25, their household had evolved into something none of them could have imagined during that first meeting in the bus terminal. They were a family of 6, Carmen and her 2 biological children, Maria, the veteran who had found new purpose in helping others, Elena, the former foster child who had become a social worker, and David, the angry teenager who had learned to trust again. They faced challenges, as all families do. Money was sometimes tight, personalities clashed, and the stress of multiple adults and children sharing one household occasionally created tension. But they had learned to communicate openly, to support each other through difficulties, and to celebrate each other's successes as shared victories. Their story had become something of a legend in their community. Social workers, veterans counselors, and educators often referred to them as an example of how chosen families could provide stability and support that traditional family structures sometimes couldn't offer. But for the family members themselves, they were simply people who had found each other when they needed each other most and had chosen to build something beautiful together.